Harry Potter.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. This is something that Auckland Council has sponsored for the last, I think, 4 years, and it's something that certainly the council believes in and wants to support. And when I reflect back on my time as a young engineer, as my background, it brings back memories. Seeing you guys around here, my career started out straight out of university. I did 2 years volunteer service abroad. People know VSA, volunteer service abroad, and I was put into one of the remotest islands in Tonga to build an airfield. There I was, 23 years old, 80 staff, building an airfield with a plant that if the barge turned up, then every 6 weeks the barge would come on up and drop off bulldozers and crew and so on and so forth. No one spoke English there, so I was dumped into it. I had to learn Tongan, no choice. Otherwise couldn't do the work. Great experience, and that sort of became the baseline from what my career built from. The lesson for me out of that for emerging talent is take on challenges, push yourself, do things that you're not really comfortable with, because that's where you grow. Just do things that put you outside your zone, and you'll be surprised at what you can do. So this is a fantastic function. I'm looking forward to hearing the stories that come out of the panel this morning, and I want to introduce, I've got a simple job, just to introduce Sarah Sinclair, who's Auckland Council's Chief Engineer, who also has a fantastic background and career, and I know a little bit about that, so no doubt some of that will come out, and also from the other panelists. So welcome along. Thank you for getting up early in the morning, those who partied a bit hard last night, and look forward to this very much. So Sarah, thank you.
Chair at the end in case Barry wants to join us, but you don't have to, Barry. You stay there and have breakfast. Thank you all for coming this morning. I have got a lovely, simple job. Barry should have said I'm the other Sarah Sinclair, not the one who was talked about all day yesterday. My role today is to be the moderator and ask some of the questions before I turn questions over to you. I'm going to ask this lovely panel in front of me to introduce themselves, and as part of their introduction to talk about a wonderful person who helped you early on in your career. And I'll start with you, Chris.
Kia ora. My name's Chris Bunny. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at MB. I look after a group that has a spattering of all kinds of stuff in there: energy, building regulation, telecommunications, commerce, and most recently government property and procurement. So it's a pretty broad patch full of interesting stuff, which gets me out of bed every morning with a bit of a bound. That was never my dream though, career-wise. One of the toughest questions that you can ask is how the hell did this happen, because I'm not really that sure. It was just going from something to something to something that interested me, and all of a sudden I was where I am, and who knows where it'll go next. In terms of people that made a big impact on me earlier in my career, the face that keeps on springing to mind was a manager that I had once upon a time, and I won't say his name because he'd probably be quite embarrassed, and there'll be several people here who would know him, I suspect. But he was a genuine coach. So he wasn't a directive manager. Every now and again he would kind of pull me into line, but for the most part he would unlock kind of my thinking, and as it turned out, we know most of the answers anyway. We just don't know that we know them. So this guy just had this innate ability of coaching and pushing and prodding and letting me work it through. And I think what I learned from that was, firstly, actually I had some answers, but secondly, kind of backing yourself and working stuff through actually is a much richer experience than just being told what the answer happens to be in any situation. So if you can find somebody who can be that kind of coaching, mentoring kind of support, then that's a great asset.
Awesome, thank you. And Brian.
Hi, Brad Ward. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of Housing Urban Development. So my patch, so to speak, includes setting up of the new Urban Development Authority, or also now called Kaingaora, which is going to be a massive, hopeful shift in terms of delivery of housing and urban development across New Zealand. And I'm also responsible for Crown-led projects oversight, so that's a lot of the big projects, say, going on up in Auckland. And a new area, which is what we're calling place-based assessment. So in terms of the government, we're trying to stop a one-size-fits-all approach to housing and urban development and take a more intensive place-based approach, so maybe Hastings, Northland, Rotorua, areas like that. So in terms of my career path, a little bit like, well, actually quite similar to Chris's. I'm not quite sure how I fell into the role I've got, apart from the fact I used to work for Chris, and I think that had something to do with it. I come from, my career has spanned AMP and financial services for a number of years and setting up insurance companies overseas, to then coming into public service and working through a number of roles, and been lucky to work on ultra-fast broadband and then work in the housing area. So never planned, but I just took the opportunities when they came, because like Chris, they were interested, and I thought, gee, I'll give it a crack. The person I'm grateful for, and this is going to sound a bit cheesy, but I'm going to do it because I thought about this overnight, is actually my wife. So I think as part of leadership, I think it's really important that we have that balance and you have that support. And for me, that my wife has been absolutely fabulous in terms of encouraging me, giving me that confidence, telling me when I'm a dick, and there's another perspective. And I think that is absolutely critical, because these roles can be all-encompassing, and you can think about them every hour of the day, which isn't helpful all the time. And I think the other, I'm going to have two. The other key person I'm grateful for, and it's similar to Chris again, was DCE that I used to work for at MB as well. And the thing that they were really good about is they gave me space, and I think that's a key factor of a really good leader, is creating space for other people to do what they need to do what they need to do. It's not giving them free rein, but you give them space, you see how they develop, and that's a key sign of leadership, and I've been grateful for that.
Lovely, thank you, and welcome, Sue.
So hi, I'm Sue Bidrose. I'm the Chief Executive at Dunedin City Council, so local government. And maybe not surprisingly, kind of have a similar story, have a career trajectory with sort of three main areas of work. I started off as a laboratory technician because that's what my cousin did, and so my mother made me get a job where she worked. That's sort of how life was when you grew up in a predominantly state housing area, and you were 16 and left school. As a few years later, I moved into the not-for-profit sector. I was one of those, did telephone counselling and things like that, like teenage girls often do. Moved into the not-for-profit sector and enjoyed that immensely. Liked working with people rather than spending my day putting my fingers up a sheep's bottom, which had been perhaps less rewarding. As a counsellor working I did an internship in psychotherapy and counselling. I was working for marriage guidance, and my own marriage broke up, which made me think I might not be that good at it. So I decided to go to university and get some proper training. And from that, I moved into the public sector, into research and policy, and moved up through the managerial ranks. So I've had kind of two key pivot points, if you like. But when I was asked to briefly talk about one person that had really influenced my career, that person is every good manager that I've ever had, and it's not every manager who didn't make that list. And there are some of those, but my career and the places I've worked and the places I've jumped to, I've often taken pay cuts to do something that intrigued me more, or something that I wanted to do, something I had a passion about. But in particular, I often changed jobs to work with somebody that I admired, to work with somebody who I thought would make me better at what I do. I don't want to be chief executive. I don't particularly like it. When I went for the job interview, I said, please don't employ me unless the person you're going to employ is crap, because I don't want to work for somebody who's worse than me. So if it's someone worse than me, employ me, but otherwise I'd be really happy to work for someone better than me, because that's what I really like doing. But my one person that I really loved working for was my first manager in the public sector. His name was Brian Perry at the Ministry for Social Development, and he was also a coach. And he said to me quite early on, you could go a long way, but you care too much about what everybody thinks of you, and you want everybody to be happy with the decisions you make. It's never going to happen. Get your head around it. If you make hard decisions, some people are going to hate your guts, and you just need to learn how to live with that. That was probably my best single piece of advice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue.
And lastly, someone else who was in the news a lot yesterday, John.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So John Grayson, currently Deputy Secretary at the Treasury, and I've got responsibility from some, well, I think pretty exciting areas in the Treasury, the capital markets area that issues and manages the Crown's debt, and export credit is also attached to that. Management of the Crown's commercial interests, so state-owned enterprises and our shareholdings in Air New Zealand and the energy companies, and infrastructure and urban development. So, look, how did I get here? Well, like most parts of my career, sort of by accident. Certainly not a lot of planning. But look, I've really been blessed, I think, to be in and out of the public sector. My career started in the public sector. I had a long career in the private sector, and I find myself back in the public sector. And perhaps one of the things that has drawn me back into the public sector is that I do like change, the big picture stuff, and so my career has tended to be characterised by reforms. So perhaps it's not surprising that I've, championed the Infrastructure Commission through to where it is today. Perhaps one person who I want to call out, I think, in my career is a former Under-Treasurer of the state of Queensland, and if you hadn't guessed, my career started in Australia. And it was at the time where we were going through financial deregulation. So going back a while now, and back in those days, states, governments had extensive interests in banks, financial institutions. I was given incredible autonomy to go off and sort of covertly think about what we might do to manage the emerging risks of owning those financial assets in a deregulated environment. And the amazing thing is, it was a novel solution which involved merging our interests with a listed bank, that it was actually taken up by government. So there was a learning in that for me to be bold. You never know, it might be taken up.
Fantastic. Thank you, panel. So we've already started with some tips or tricks coming out, and I know you're starting to get your hot breakfast as we go now. But on that point of tips and tricks, starting with the be bold, my next question for you all, and I'm going to start with Brad this time, is, no pressure, always pressure. What would be the one tip or trick that you wish you'd been told early on? The thing that would have made a big difference to your, maybe to your career trajectory, or just to the way you thought about your career?
For me, it would have been be patient. I think when I left uni, or even during uni, I had this view that I'll go to this role, and then it will go to that role, and that'll be that time period, and then I'll do that, and that'll be that time period. And then, that was the way it was sort of planned. It was a bit like it'll work like a Gantt chart. And what became pretty clear is it's not how the career path, it's not how it's worked for me. And actually the beauty of what I've been able to experience is opportunities do come to those who wait. I'm a firm believer in that, and that's something I try to tell my leadership team as well, and take those opportunities. But, it might be 6 months from now, or it might be a year or 18 months. And I think if you're patient, the right opportunities do come. If you're less patient, I think you sometimes miss out on the better chances. And I've been fortunate to have really good opportunities.
So this is kind of a message from you to stay in place rather than to move if you're not getting the jobs that you want in the pace that you're getting them.
Yeah, I think I think we've all been in situations in a career where something hasn't gone right at a particular point in time, and the initial knee-jerk reaction might be, I've had a guts for, I want to change. But I think what I've sort of learned as well, actually, just see it out for a little bit longer, and it may be maybe 3 months, 6 months down the track, you do decide there's still a change. But it's not just to react to the moment; it's to sort of step back and be patient and see what comes. Because as I said, they for me, a lot of the opportunities have come when I least expect it, and I haven't asked for them. Yeah.
Good advice, good advice. So Sue, you've already done a couple of tips and tricks, but for an emerging leader, what would you say, top tip or trick?
I was speaking at a Global Women Initiative when I'd been chief executive for maybe about 18 months or so, and so I'd gone up to Auckland and I was speaking at this thing, and somehow it had ended up at the wrong time in my calendar, and I turned up accidentally an hour early, and the only person there was the speaker. And didn't make me look particularly competent, but anyway, that was Jenny Shipley. So she was New Zealand's first elected woman Prime Minister. Our first woman Prime Minister. She hadn't, this was well after she was Prime Minister, but she was getting ready to speak in the first session. And because I was there an hour early and no one else was there, we had a cup of tea. I made her a cup of coffee. And she sat down and talked to me about my career and what I was doing and why. And it was like a 3/4 hour mentoring session that I didn't have to pay for. It was a remarkable opportunity. One thing she said really, really stuck in my mind, and she said it to me very directly and very forcefully, and she said, never waste a gathering of people by talking to someone you already know. Mm-hmm. It has really stuck in my mind because I'm an introvert. I mean, I don't mind public speaking, but I really loathe that, get up and go around the room and kind of work the room and talk to all these people who you then have to remember and you don't, and, I don't like that. Schmoozy stuff is not my natural style. But actually, I really notice as chief executive how my career has suffered, or how much harder things are for me to get done because I haven't done that all my life. And start now, start while you're young, build up, spend the time, put the effort in, remember what she said, because you'll meet people that later on you think, actually, I need a second opinion. And I remember a guy who I just really liked his take on the world back at such and such, and you can remind them, get those kind of networks for yourself. That's my I wish I'd done it. It would have made me much better at my job.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And John, we'll come to you last, Chris.
Tips. I guess the first tip would be don't sit around waiting for tips. Get out there and make a go of it yourself. But perhaps, by all means, if there's tips come along, receive them gratefully, but don't wait for them. Perhaps one, though, that I think at a high level, I mean, when you're planning your career, I think it's helpful not to think about where you might fit in the world as it is, but in where it might be, and think about how you actually might get there. In the infrastructure space, for example, you know, it's not that long ago that, you know, it was a very different world. Electricity, for example, was, you know, an integrated monopoly service provided by government, right? And now there are so many elements of it, so many aspects that didn't exist before. You know, the market trading side of it, for example. So I think that's important to think about where things are going and where you might fit into that new world. And I suppose the challenge I'd throw out today is how might the infrastructure space look different with the advent of the Infrastructure Commission? So think about how you might fit into that world.
Fantastic. Good advice. And to you, Chris.
Okay, getting really practical now, and this is a tip that I still use to this day. Be nice to support staff.
Yeah.
Those people know the organisation, they know where the bodies are, they can make your life really good or they can make it hell, so look after those people. Another tip that I would encourage people to take on is to be curious. So ask those questions that occur. When I started my career, which seems like a lifetime ago, terrible getting old, it felt at the time that we were supposed to shut up, sit in the corner and just learn through some kind of mysterious osmosis, and that's not the world now. So I value younger people, emerging leaders coming into my organisation and actually asking the questions, because it's forcing us to think about the why. So keep on asking that. You know, you'll hear all the time, there's no such thing as a dumb question, and that's nearly true. But don't let that hold you back. Ask the questions, put your hand up, take someone off to the side. Because if it's a question in your mind, it's probably a question in someone else's, so it's well worth, you know, just voicing that. And as part of that, I would say be reflective. So all the time I do interview panels, and it never ceases to amaze me how few people actually reflect on their experiences. So you ask the standard scenario-based question about, tell us about a time that you, and I can't think of a single thing in my career that I've done that I couldn't have done better or differently. And if you force yourself, make a habit of actually going back and thinking, what could I have done differently? Could I have got a different result if I acted or involved somebody or did something just that much different? And that reflection, you'll learn a lot from it. So it's, you know, make a habit, put in your diary, end of the day, 20 minutes, just reflect on the day, what could have been different? And then finally, and I know I've got far too many, embrace leadership opportunities. So everybody has the opportunity to lead something all of the time. So step up. Don't wait for the right title to actually do something. At work at the moment, this is a really exciting thing. With the big push on diversity and inclusion, you know, we have staff kind of self-forming groups to actually push stuff along. So we have the grads deciding that we are short of a mental health network and, you know, picking that thing up. And those are the things that, you know, give people the opportunity to actually make a difference, but try a few things. And it's that subtle art of influence that if you gain through those kind of opportunities, it'll hold you in good stead as, you know, you go further up the more formal career route.
So make yourself busier. That's a key message that I'm hearing. So a few of you in passing already have talked about the things that have changed where you're going. I'm going to start with you this time, Sue, because you've already talked about the two major pivot points in your three major career changes. So if you were to, you can either talk about all three or talk about one and how that pivot point changed your career. And I'm going to ask everyone the same question as well. What was a pivot point for you?
That point you made about being self-reflective, Chris, I think that is really critical for being good at your job, and I cannot stress it highly enough. And if you don't know how to do it, go and see a counsellor, get some help, get somebody to train you how to do it, because we're not taught to necessarily do this when we're kids. And for me, my pivot points have been about looking at myself and thinking about how rewarding life is or isn't, or and thinking, what is it that really turns me on in terms of going to work for 8, 10, 12 hours a day? And if it isn't putting your fingers up a sheep's backside because you work at an animal research centre, then start to think about what it is. Start to think about what really does excite you. Look for somebody who would excite you to work with. So one of my pivot careers has been because I was doing the sheep thing and I decided I'd rather work with people. And the other pivot career was moving out of that not-for-profit sector into the public sector. And that was about specifically going to work with somebody that I wanted to go and work for. And that was true both when I worked in Wellington in central government, and the decision to move to local government was about going to work specifically for another person who resigned 6 weeks later and I got her job. But being self-reflective, thinking, what do I want out of life? You know, what turns me on? What do I like doing? Spending some time, what am I good at? What am I not good at? Do I want to enhance skills I've already got? Or do I want to really grow some of my strengths? But I'm gobsmacked by the number of people I meet in my own sector who've got no idea what their own strengths are. They've never thought about it. They just look blankly when I ask them. It's like, you're not supposed to do that thinking. You are supposed to do that thinking. That's part of what you get paid to do, to make yourself better and better at your job. That's what you get paid for. And I think that self-reflection is probably the key difference between people I want to hire and people that I don't.
Good answer, John.
Pivot points, I guess one for me, and look, I think you've got to try and seize every challenge you're thrown to be a pivot point to take you somewhere. But a couple, I think, one would be that merger of the financial institutions and the privatisation out of that, leading that at a pretty early stage of my career was a pivot for me, gave me a lot of confidence that I could, could do things at a higher level, and it was probably that then led me into the private sector. The other pivot point for me, on the negative side, if you like, was the GFC. So, after a long period of just continual growth, and the GFC hit, and here I was in the riskiest part of the market in an investment bank, and that happened to be Australia's largest corporate failure of the GFC. Talk about a catalyst for self-reflection. That was it. Yeah.
So how did that then change? Where did you pivot to?
Yeah, well, I think, I took a bit of time for self-pity. Make sure that's not a very long period, but I think you do need to do that bit of grieving, dust yourself off and get back up. So I think, again, I mentioned earlier that my career has been a series of accidents rather than a plan. Interestingly, not that long after that occurred, I was asked by the incoming, the new Premier of Queensland to head the public service and the Department of Premier and Cabinet there. So that shocked me back into action, if you like, gave me that confidence back, and I loved that. It was great to be back into the public service and leading a big reform program.
Excellent, thank you.
So my first pivot, I left university after the first year and went and drove a truck, and it turned out I wasn't very good at it. I've either got a problem with spatial awareness or attention to detail. Yeah. So, but that was a really good learning for me, because I did it for 6 months and loved it for the first 4 months, and then realised that this wasn't for me, and it got me back to university, and I ended up finishing up and carrying on. More probably significantly though, the pivot points were where I really pushed myself out of a comfort zone. So I went to the UK in 1999 and cold called the Treasury and said, "Hi, it's Chris from New Zealand, I've just arrived, can I have a job please?" And they pretty much hung up on me. And I got another job, and 3 weeks later the phone rang and it was the UK Treasury saying, "Hi, Chris from New Zealand, are you still interested? And I said, yeah, why not? So I went in, and it was doing PPPs and PFIs, and I'd studied finance, and I remember at the interview, I was interviewed by a guy called Sir Adrian Montague, who was very posh, and he just kept on asking the same question, which was, he'd say, what did you do in New Zealand? I'd describe what I did, and he'd say, yes, but what did you do? And I would say what I did, and he'd say, yes, but what did you do? And by the time we got through 7 layers of that question, I realised I hadn't actually done anything. But anyway, I got the job, and one of his other questions was, do you do corporate finance or project finance? And despite having a finance degree, I couldn't actually recall what the difference was. So I took a punt and said project finance. He said, fantastic. Mike Gerard, who's this international guru at project finance, will be thrilled to have another project financier on the team. So that kind of made me gulp a little bit. And then as I started, the tax treatment was a big deal, and there was this guy called David who promised to quiz me up on tax treatment if I promised to quiz him up on project finance. So I had to go. This was kind of when the internet was still not, I wasn't quite sure it was going to take off, 1999. It turned out it's been okay. So I had to race down to a bookshop and buy a textbook on project finance, and I kept one chapter ahead of David. We'd have these weekly coaching sessions, and I managed to just kind of bluff my way through. So I think we're straying into gender differences now. But what that did teach me was that you can, the pool was very deep, but you dive on in, and if you invest the time and the effort, you'll probably float. And that's, time and time again, that's been a pattern. I didn't know I wanted to be a manager. I still don't know if I want to be a manager. I have this fundamental dislike of people, and all the problems that they bring to work every day. But, as I got, as I got into it, people are the most wonderful thing. The leverage that you get if you can get a direction with a group is just astonishing. And all of the, the richness that they bring and the different perspectives and the issues from time to time, it makes it a really interesting place to be. So I didn't know if I wanted to be a people manager. I had leadership opportunities before the people management formal opportunities. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go, because if I don't give it a go, I'll never know. And then I jumped into it and discovered that actually it was pretty cool. And I can't imagine doing anything differently now.
Thank you. Do you want to reply to that, Brad, before we ask you about the pivot points?
What's that?
Do you want to reply to that?
No, Chris always is very understated in terms of his leadership skills.
So, pivot points.
So
Pivot points.
so for me, there's sort of two types of pivot points, if that's what you want to call them. So one was, so I was living in Aussie, working for a financial services company, had done at university political science and economics, but for some reason found myself in finance and then doing IT project management. And quite sure how I got there, but that was where I was. And my wife and I decided we wanted to come back to New Zealand. We'd had enough of Sydney. And I happened to apply for a job in the public sector in Sydney, over the phone, in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, back in the 90s. Back in 2002, 3. Anyway, I came back to New Zealand, and I was public sector for about a year. Worked with a manager at that time who was not a good manager. Won't name them. Decided to go to work for Unisys. Decided I never wanted to work for an American corporate again, and went back to the public sector, and I've stayed there ever since. And the reason why I've stayed in the public sector and what drew me back, though, was the big picture stuff, the same John talked about, and it just, for some reason, it set better with my value system and what I knew drove me, which was how can we act, I can get into a position where I can make a real difference. I can, have a focus on these big issues, and have that drive and motivation, and that was really, really key. Because I think if you're passionate about what you're doing, you'll really make a good fist of it. And people will tell you through your career, look, it's not the subject area, it's the skills you bring, and you can be in that sector over there or that sector there, and you'll be wonderful because of the skills you bring. I'm not actually a believer of that. I think you've got to have passion in passionate about the sector and what you're working on as well. And the second pivot point was, so in the public sector, never thought I wanted to be a general manager, never thought I thought my success would be getting into a policy manager role. Never thought about the general manager, never thought about a policy director, and definitely never thought about the role I'm in now. But it's probably sort of, it was a bit of probably one particular turning point. The pivot was growing in confidence in those leadership roles, and that probably goes back to my patience point before as well. So go into the role and I think, actually I like working with people. I can see actually where I can add value, I can create space, and actually I got a kick out of seeing people who were working with me actually delivering really cool stuff, and got a kick out of seeing them confident enough and motivated enough to then go into their own leadership roles. And I thought, oh well, shit, actually I've got some capability here, not perfect by all means, but some capability, and that to me has given me the confidence to sort of get to where I am today.
That's a really good one. And we've had quite a mix from the panel of the do you go in and learn while you're there, or do you wait till you know and then make the next step? And Chris, to your point, that is a bit of a gender thing where women, I think statistically, tend to wait until they've ticked every box to apply for a job, and men jump in a bit. So before I get on to the next sort of official question, I'll ask the panel, have any of you got any views on that? Is it fake it till you make it, or is it wait till you are confident enough? Or is that the same thing?
Yeah, so I'm very fake it till you make it. But I had a session with young Pacific interns at MB probably about a year and a half ago. And it was a very loose brief. It was get up, talk about your career, kind of like today. So I didn't quite know what I was going to talk about. And we ended up having a fantastic hour with these kind of 20-odd young Pacific people. And at the end of it, I told that UK story about going to something that I should never have got anywhere near, but got such great experience from that journey. And I remember at the very end, somebody put their hand up and said, well, the Prime Minister got some Pacific scholarships, and I'm wondering whether or not to apply. And I said just automatically, well, why wouldn't you? The worst thing that you can get is a no, and you'll get a letter and it'll say no thanks, and who cares? But so the upside is far better than the downside. The upside is you'll get a yes. So why not? And it turned out that there was something like, I think 6 or 7 of that group actually applied for that scholarship kind of the day after, 2 days after that. So quite often, I do tend to think, I'm clearly very much a man, I do tend to think upside downside. Take and that's not just for careers, that's with most aspects of my job. What's the upside here, what's the downside here? And take a judgment. Certainly what I've discovered is, you acquire skills and things as you spend time in a role, and all these experiences that you get all over the show will be not repeatable, but they will give you something that you can reuse later on in your career. It's amazing how often, similar things come up and you can trade on something that you've picked up previously. So, I think I can't wait until I emerge. Because I think this is going to be, even the day that I retire, I'll still be learning a truckload. So I think learning on the job is an absolutely fine thing to be doing.
Has anyone on the panel got a different view? Or
I've often reflected on the tension between two kind of things that we say for people who are looking to leadership. One of them is fake it till you make it, and the other one is it's really important to be authentic. And I've often thought about the contradiction in those two things. And particularly I thought, how do you be an authentic leader if you're an asshole? And so actually, there's more to being authentic than just being yourself. It is actually about shaping yourself to be the person you want to be, and it goes back to that reflection thing. who do you want to be, and how do you make yourself be that person? Another quick thing about being women in leadership, and another one of my really good managers said to me when I was at Ministry of Social Development, she said, stop being the person that volunteers to get up and write things on the whiteboard. She said, and I thought I was doing it because then I controlled the narrative, right? So I thought it was really clever because firstly I got to assign the right people to the right action points, and I got to write the action points the way that I thought they should be written for the best outcomes. She said, you're pegging yourself out to be a secretary. You know, when I said I'd made a cup of tea for Jenny Shipley, I've made cups of tea or coffee for 4 Prime Ministers just because of my job and people I run into. And it's infinitely more rewarding to do that because you look over, you see Jacinda surrounded by 10 men who are talking to her and she hasn't had a cuppa, and you say, would you like a cuppa? You nip off your hand to one and she looks enormously grateful and drinks it. That's much more rewarding than having a Prime Minister think that you're someone's PA and ask you to make a cuppa for them. You need to pitch yourself as the person that you want people to see you as.
Good one, thank you. So, my last question before I open to the floor. I will say one of the things, there's a book that is called Things I Wish People Told Me Earlier On in My Career. It's a really good book, and one of the things that it says is that a lot of deals, including deals about your next job, are made long before things become public and jobs are advertised and stuff like that, which goes back to your point, Sue, of having a really good network of people who think of you at critical points. So, my last question to all of you, and I'm going to start at the other end of the panel with you, John. My last question to all of you is, what's the one thing you wish someone had told you early on in your career?
So, I think, and you know, this is sort of ironic given that, you know, I've said that I love change and love being part of that is just to have been warned that the world will change, and sometimes in ways that, you know, you mightn't be grateful. You know, I'm of course thinking of the GFC experience. So I think that's it. I tend to, you know, see the opportunities and just go hard at them. And perhaps, you know, my blind side is some of the downside. So in that GFC example, you know, I made an assumption that the world was just going to continue on its upward trajectory. Be quite careful, that's all.
I'm going to ask you next, Brad. So what's the one big thing you wish someone had told you early on in your career?
So I don't know if this is going to be slightly weird or controversial, but I'll go there. I think it's actually all right to have imposter syndrome, and I know it's an overused, it's a term that's used quite a bit, and it's a term that you sometimes differentiate sort of women leaders from male leaders, but actually I think every good leader or leadership team I've been part of, you can see it. And how people act sometimes and how they talk about things. I think when I started out in my career, it was like, no, you've got to project a certain thing, you've got to act a certain way, you've got to, you know, things get tough, you basically act the way that you expect that people's expecting you and the values of that particular organisation. It was definitely the way that management ran when I was at outside in the private sector in a particular firm. But I think having that now going, actually, it's all right to actually doubt. It's all right to go, actually, I do have some weaknesses, and I'll work on those, but also I have some damn good strengths, and I will continue to value those and build off those. And I think and that goes to the reflection, with actually thinking it's okay to have a bit of imposter syndrome, I think it makes you sharper in your leadership role, and it also makes you more reflective and genuine. But you know, you read all the leadership books, and you know, Bravo Zero and SAS, and you know, Bear Grylls, and there's nothing taught in there about real failure. It's, you know, you've won, and it's win-lose, and it's not how the real world operates.
Yeah. Sue, on the reflective side.
Look, I'd go back to that thing I said earlier about using your networks, about making networks, about deliberately constructing networks. Look around the table that you're sitting at right now and think to yourself, where might these people end up? I mean, sure, one or two of them might end up in jail for running a Ponzi scheme, but some of them might be chief executive, they might be head of an infrastructure unit, they might be doing some things that you think that fascinates me, and that's a brain I'd like to pick at next year's conference. You know, make those kind of concrete, definite decisions and put some effort into keeping those networks. I've got a few people I've worked with over the years who just every 6 months I get a quick email or a text. They just stay in touch. They're supreme networkers, and I have rung them, all of them, at some point in time for a bit of advice, or, hey, tell me, do you know this person? Or those networks are invaluable, and start them early, because the earlier you start them, the bigger they'll be.
Fantastic. And to you, Chris. And then I'm going to open up the floor to questions.
So I would say that, you know, view your career as a marathon, not a sprint, and that's not supposed to sound like a long grind, but it is a long game, and I think a loose idea of kind of where you're going is probably not a bad thing to have, because life's going to throw some things at you as you go. You'll get some pleasant surprises, and, you know, unfortunately there'll be some unpleasant surprises, and it'll throw your trajectory a bit. So, you know, don't sweat the, I need to be here by then, and then it's there, and but there we go. It's keep doing what's making you happy, what you're getting value from. I was getting a little bit more melancholy there, trying to think what I'd want on my tombstone or something when I died. And I think it would be something like, all my retirement speech, let's get a little bit more upbeat. And it's, you know, that I was happy, that I enjoyed what I did and I made a difference. And if I get to the end of my career and I can say those two things, then that's a great result.
Cool. So, emerging leaders, the challenge is over to you now. You've got a panel of amazing people here who have clearly achieved a lot and thought a lot about what they've achieved. So, over to you to ask this amazing resource some questions. Do I have a question from the floor, please? Great. Have we got mics? Thank you.
Kia ora, Brad Olsen here from Infometrics. With your leadership, how do you balance between being a leader for yourself and a leader for other people in terms of who comes first? Or how do you balance that?
Crikey. Look, it's hard because, you know, I've got quite a large group of people, and I've got direct reports. You know, they've got reports, and I'm also part of a wider leadership team as well at the ministry. Look, the bulk of my time I've deliberate is around my people, because that's for two reasons. One is actually I want to make sure they're motivated, got the resources, are doing the things that we need to get done. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're there to make some differences and to achieve things. Second part of that, obviously, it's important I focus on them, because I also want them to develop, and I want them to actually enjoy what they're doing, and I also want to retain them, which is a challenge at the moment in the public sector. I mean, if you go out and look for really good policy advice, it is a very small pool. So anyone who's looking to be a policy advisor, really good opportunities, by the way. And the pay's not too bad. Well, it's getting better. Look, in terms of my own time, I do take time out, like Chris talked about. You know, it might be, I come in early in the morning. That's just the way I work, and I'll spend the first hour actually just with me, and I won't have any meetings, and I might go and sit in a corner, and that's my time out. But I think it is really important to do that, and I think it's really important too, because in these roles too, you know, at the end of the week you can be pretty exhausted. So one of the things I've got better at now is actually not trying to do too much in the weekend. We could all take work home in the weekend and do that. but actually I think it's really important to have 2 full days downtime. And in those times, you do think about work, but you do think about it from your own perspective, and that time out is useful. And look, the other thing in terms of taking time, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I pulled a hamstring playing indoor cricket, and the physio said I'm not going to get any better unless I stop being lazy and went running. And that's something I do a lot now, and that's something for me. I completely switch off, and that's critical. And I'd say actually, I don't know, actually a lot of the leaders I know who I've worked with over the years and worked with now, actually a lot of them have taken up running or mountain biking or other sort of fitness to actually just take that space.
Good tips. And from this end, leader for yourself, leader for other people.
Look, I actually don't see those things as in conflict, and I think a good leader is going to make sure that those things are aligned. Actually.
Yeah, I think the same. I lost 50 kilos in the last 18 months and have taken up running, and I'm running in a 10k race Saturday after next, and have realised this gives me an hour, I'm a slow runner, of listening to music, and I hate music, but I run in time, so I've had to find enough songs to last an hour. And I don't think about work at all. I scuba dive as well, always have done, and I don't think about work when I'm scuba diving either, because I'm too busy trying to make sure I don't die. And so making sure I get me time is important, but leadership intrinsically is about leading people. And so that's got to be the focus is, you've all met leaders and managers who don't take people with them. It's my way or the highway. They're on my list of people that I don't want to be like. So working out how to lead people so that they want to follow you and so that they want to become leaders in their own right, that's the job.
And Chris, anything to add? Or?
Just a couple of points. One is people are always watching. Sue made a comment earlier about authentic leadership, and I do try and be authentic. I don't try and pretend everything's rosy if the ship's sinking, but equally, with my natural resting face, I can often look a lot more troubled than is actually I've got cause to be. So actually trying to remember to project, what I want to project is quite important. I don't know how that's relevant. But anyway, the point I did want to make is that manager that I referenced first up about somebody who made a real difference for me, he used to play this conversation with me, which was, what gives you energy? So if you think about your energy levels or your motivation as being, a bank account, and you want it to have about 0 on it, and some things will take away and some things will add to. And I've been misdiagnosed as being an extrovert. So for you weirdo extroverts out there, you get your energy, I'm told, from people. People interaction's a big deal. For people who are more introvert focused, it's more that reflective time, that being able to get away. And trying to, wherever possible, plan your day to get that balance right. So often I'll go into work, and if I see that I've got 4 catch-ups with my direct reports through the course of the afternoon, my emotional response is, and by the time I get to poor staff member number 5, they're not going to have the best conversation. So trying to break that up. Maybe it's a couple of those in the afternoon with a bit of walking time or something else just to kind of keep that balance going. So, I think that hits both those points. It's leading my people and looking after myself at the same time.
Lovely, thank you. And we've got time for one more question. Tara, can we get the mic over to... We have 2 questions. 2 questions.
Oh, Sarah can go.
When do you go? Yeah.
I've got a question for Sue in particular, if I might. We heard a bit yesterday about millennials being rather disengaged with the political system and particularly local councils and not being involved. In Dunedin, where you've got a large student population, you'd almost expect that millennials might be the majority and would have control of the discourse. So I guess my question is, what do you think it would take to get millennials engaged in a place like Dunedin where they really should be mobilised and having that control?
Yeah, we're putting a bit of thought into that, or we have been this year. There's been a law change which says that I have responsibility for increasing voter turnout now in local government elections. Not for the whole country, fortunately, just Dunedin. But so chief executives have that. That's part of our job. And but on the other hand, I've got some councillors who predominantly get voted for by people who are 78 and don't want change, and they're really adamant that they don't want to spend any money doing anything that's going to make voters in the student area vote, because that means that they're likely to reduce their majority. So somehow we've got to invigorate a sense of why it matters across the whole city even-handedly. But students disproportionately don't vote. They come, especially in Dunedin, where a huge proportion of our students are from out of town. So they come in because it's party town, and they do their study and then they go home, and they may not feel particularly invested in Dunedin. I don't think we have the answer to that, although partnerships is probably that's the best thing we think we've come up with, which is certainly the OUSA the Student Association understand the importance of student voting. There's a few big initiatives happening down in the student part of town in this long-term plan and in this next 3 years. So encouraging students, if you get the wrong councillors in, all of this stuff might disappear. So you need to be voting for people that look after your interests. So partnerships with the OUSA and with the university itself, in order for them to tell the story to their cohort about why it matters. Councils are they're different, even maybe a little bit different to central government, and they're certainly different to the private sector. I heard one of the councillors at Auckland Council talk about this at one point, because one of the politicians was suggesting that they get the chief executive of Air New Zealand or somebody in to talk to staff, to kind of get staff on track about, how to do things better. And the councillor said, it's really different in council, because if something goes wrong in the private sector, your board stand up, Air New Zealand's board stand up and say, have confidence, we're sorting this out, we're a sound airline, we've got great profit margins, we've got looking into the future things. If something goes wrong in my council, some of my board of governors stand up and say, everybody's useless and they're all on the take and they're all complete nonsense and the whole infrastructure's falling apart and the city's going to fall into the sea. It's probably the only sector where your board of governors, some of them are there to actively make you look as bad as they possibly can, because that's what gets them elected. And that, I think, for young people, that's an incredible turn-off. That vicious style of politics, which seems to be, look around the world, increasingly contagious, I think that's a problem.
It's a good question, and it's an empowerment question as much as anything else, isn't it? And it was our last question, so does anyone else from the panel want to either give advice about how to engage millennials more in democracy, or reflect on millennial engagement and empowerment generally?
Oh, look, I guess it's one of those things. I think the market will look after it. In that, I think it's incumbent on, and civic leaders eventually are going to be motivated to engage with that growing sector of their constituency. So, yeah.
I'm not sure about the sort of the voting side, but just thinking about millennials and engagement. All I can go on is my experience with millennials who I work with every day, and it always amazes me. I think that it's like we've put all millennials in this sort of bucket and said you all look the same. It's like it's like all white bald guys think the same as well. And it's like, God help us. So I don't know what the answer is to around turnout, but my experience with and I wonder if the problem is with thinking about voter turnout, though, maybe with millennials, is we think, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. And in fact, my experience through the work is actually millennials all come in different sizes, different views, different perspectives. Yeah. And maybe that's a better way to look at it. And maybe if you if we thought of it that way rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, we might have something more effective, but that's as much as I can contribute on that.
Okay, we are at 8:15. You've all got, are you going to come and close, by the way? You've all got something to go to next. So I'm going to call the panel to a halt by saying, certainly I've really enjoyed this morning and learnt a lot, which is I'm profoundly grateful for. I think we've been really lucky this morning to have a panel of really reflective people. So I'd like you to join with me in thanking Chris, Brad, Sue and John, and do feel free to approach them over the rest of the conference and talk to them about things. But I think you've been awesome, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. That's great.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you to the panel for a great start to the day. Thank you also to Auckland Council for your 4th year of support for this event. Look, we're now at 8:15. We would encourage you now to head across next door. Minister Grant Robertson is starting our morning this morning. So thank you for joining us this morning and enjoy the rest of the conference. Good morning. Thank you.